You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
What's up, music nerds? This is the Modern Musicology Podcast, and my name is Alan, and today it's just me and my good buddy, Rob Levy. How you doing, Rob?
I'm good. How are you? And this is probably the nerdiest of all the ones we've ever done.
Yeah, I would think so. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, good. So we had a whole topic planned for tonight, and then our other two co-hosts, Anthony Williams and Stephanie Seymour, are both under the weather and unable to join us. And we wish them both the best and send them our love and hope everything's fine. And we'll see them again soon. I'm sure they'll be back in a week or so. But since it's just the two of us, we thought, well, why don't we talk about something that both of us really love? We are both total nerds about music books.
Yeah.
And, we just don't get to talk about that stuff very often. So we're devoting a whole show to it.
Yeah. And I think you and I, having both worked in record stores and libraries, makes us wired to a certain way for music books.
True.
I'm pretty sure, I haven't checked the status of this lately, but I'm pretty sure you're like me, where your stack of music books to get to is obnoxiously long. And just when you make progress on it, another one comes out.
Mm-hmm.
This is a perpetual mountain, it's like chasing the rock up the hill and then the rock rolls down the hill. It's just like that.
I've completely run out of shelf space, and now I've got two piles of books on the floor. And most of those are the ones that I got for Christmas last year. And I had intended to really, devote time to them and get them all read this year. Well, that did not happen. I got some of them read, but I've still got so many to get through. So I cannot get any new books for Christmas this year, and I cannot buy any for myself this year.
Yeah. And I have stopped looking at UK bookstores
right.
for music books.
Right.
I can't do it anymore.
Oh my gosh.
I just can't.
And then every once in a while we have a guest that comes on the show that's an author, and we have to read their book too to get ready for, interviewing them. And so, over the past year, some of my reading time went to that and got introduced to a couple of really great things that way.
Yeah. Some of my favorite books of this year have been by people we've had on our show, which is really great.
Yeah. Same. Awesome. Same.
And there's been surprises. There's been books I've read that are like, wow, I knew this was good, but I didn't know it was going to be like this friggin' fantastic. And then there's the whole thing where I'm reading this book about somebody I know nothing about, or a genre I know nothing about, and I probably will never listen to it, but man, this is interesting. There's those books too.
Yeah.
So there's just a ton.
I've been surprised a couple of times this year by books that I was super excited about, and then did not enjoy them as much as I expected I was going to. Yeah. And that's so disappointing.
Yeah. There's been a couple times where I'm like, oh, I wish this was better. But yeah. And there's just so many. It's just like, oh my God, just please stop.
Well, let's talk about some of the stuff that we've read. We'll start with stuff this year, and then we'll just talk about whatever else we have time for. What's your favorite book from the past year?
Oh man. So I have to tread carefully here because technically I work for John Robb.
Oh,
and I don't want to anger the gods, but his book, The Art of Darkness, A History of Goth, is pretty fantastic. And I am not someone who is like super into goth music. I used to be into it much more than now.
Yeah.
I'm more of like the classic stuff, but that book is fantastic. But I have to say that probably my favorite book this year has been the book by Richard Evans, the music that the machines make, that one.
Yeah.
I'm butchering the title too, which is terrible.
Listening to the music the machines
make.
Yes.
Yeah, by Richard Evans. That's been my favorite book of the year.
Wow.
And I love that period of music, but I learned so much about it.
Yeah.
The other book I liked, which isn't technically a music book, that I've read twice since it came out, is Nick Griffiths' Dead Star, which is kind of based on the life of David Bowie, but it's a fictitious musician and the misadventures he has and stuff. And that's been really good too. But I'd have to say the Goth book and the Richard Evans books are both like just phenomenal.
I gotta say, I really loved that Richard Evans book.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it so much. And, you know, that's a period that I, you know, am pretty familiar with, but he goes so in depth. I mean, he digs deep on this stuff and introduced me to things that I had never listened to, or even periods of a certain artist or songs by a certain artist that I hadn't heard before that ended up being like really seminal. And, you know, like I had heard the name Throbbing Gristle before, but I had never listened to it. So that was eye-opening.
Yeah, I love the stuff on Throbbing Gristle. And, you know, I love this band called Telex a little bit. And I love them more now. And, you know, I love a lot of that stuff. And I grew up with it. And he made me feel validated because, you know, a lot of the times you say, oh, I listen to synth pop or synthesizer pop. You kind of get this weird grin and groan from people, depending on who you talk to. And that made me feel very validated as somebody that listens to music. And I think that era of music is kind of often written off as just sort of like prefabricated music by machines, you know. And I think that he really does a lot to explain the artistry of it.
Yes.
It's the same way with the John Robb book. Everyone thinks, oh, goth music is all doom and gloom, you know. And I don't think people realize how related it is to glam and how close it ties into other things like punk and post-punk. And so I like that book a lot too. And honestly, I'm trying really hard not to look at new music books coming out right now because I'm so backlogged. It's just...
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah. And Santa's coming, so I want Santa to surprise me.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. What about you?
Well, my big read this year, the one that took the most time because it's kind of a thick book. And I tell you, it was hard to get through. I was really excited about it. But then once I, you know, got about halfway through, I was like, oh my God, how much longer is this going to go? And that was the bio by Jann Wenner, Like a Rolling Stone. He's the founder of Rolling Stone magazine. He was one of the founders of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And he has lived an incredible life. And it was a tough read. I'm just going to say. And I was sort of like, I was looking forward to it. But then when I got into it, it was just so, I don't know. I just felt bogged down by it. It was an interesting read. I will say that the stories he tells are really interesting. And the fact that one person lived all of these things just blows my mind. Like, you know, I wish I could live that life. But there came a point where it just became like this recitation of here's another thing that happened and another thing that happened. And so much stuff revolved around the Rolling Stones and revolved around Hunter Thompson, you know, and there was just like these recurring characters that I don't know, that kind of felt like overplayed, I guess. I don't know how to describe it, but there was a chapter where it opens with the 9/11 attack because he lives in New York and the Rolling Stone office was very close to there. So he was right there when it happened. And that section of the chapter ended. And then the next section just carries on with something else completely unrelated. And it was such a whiplash moment. You know, it's like 9/11, and especially being so close to ground zero, is such a huge event to not even devote at least a chapter to it. But and you know, and to deal with it in isolation, but then just to make it yet another like thing in a series of things that happened. Oh man, I don't know. I felt weird about that. I had to take a little break from that.
I've heard it's good, but I've heard it's a little disjointed, and I haven't jumped into it yet because I just know I'm gonna have to put everything aside and do that.
Yeah,
you know?
I'm kind of a slow reader, so it takes me a while to get through things. And this one was so big, I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to find the end of this thing.
There is something satisfactory about finding a really dense music book, but then it is equally as disappointing when you get a big, giant music book that's big and thick, and it's not what you want it to be. It's like going on a bad date. I know that we were talking about kind of off mic that this is the 50th anniversary of the birth of hip hop, right?
Yeah.
And there is a fantastic book that's been in print for a while that I love, that probably has a really great origin story for hip hop. It's called Last Night a DJ Saved My Life: The History of the Disc Jockey by
Yes.
Bill Brewster and I think Frank Brofton.
Yeah.
And I reread the hip hop chapters this week, but it's fantastic.
Oh, wow.
It's a really great sort of like, you want to know the story of how hip hop started in the context of like other DJs and things without just being bowled over with minutia and having to know the social political landscape of the Bronx or whatever. It's perfect. And it still reads great. It's over 10 years old, but man, it's amazing.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it, but I've never read it.
And the way it covers disco is great. It gets into like the evolution of like rave DJs and things. And it's got a fantastic section on Northern Soul. So like, it's kind of like if you want to know everything there is to know about hip hop, Northern Soul, you know, dance music DJs in the 50s. It's like a 1-volume book that collects all of it. That's like really solid all the way through.
You know, I knew the danger of us doing a show like this would be that you would suggest things that I would want to add to my to be read pile.
And I knew that you would too.
And oh my gosh, I really want to read this book.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So here's a question. This is just a completely off kilter question. Do you loan out your music books?
I don't loan out my books.
Yay! All right, there
Right?
we go. Right. Okay. Yeah,
No,
that's a weird quirk that us people that love music books are. It's like, I'll tell you about this book, but you can't borrow it.
yeah.
Which is pretty great. What do you think makes a good book on music, biography or period or whatever?
Oh man. I think when it relates its topic to you in a way that, like you said, doesn't dwell too much on minutia, but it gives you a sense of place. Like it puts you in the setting, you know, whether it be a genre or whether it be the life of an artist, or if it's an artist writing their own biography. I want to feel like I'm part of it. You know, I want to feel like they are sharing something that like it's a conversation between them and me, like they're just telling me stories. It can be like about anything, but as long as I feel like they're setting a good scene and I get to have a sense of what it's about, you know, then I think that's what engages me.
Yeah, like Tony Fletcher does that really well in his book on the Smiths and Boy About Town and stuff. He's really good at making you feel like you're in that period of time, whatever he's writing about.
Yeah.
His book on REM that he's rewritten a couple times has really, really been great about sort of making you feel like you're around that scene and you understand it. I love that. Another guy who does it really well is Gary Giddens, who writes a lot about jazz. I think he writes for the New Yorker too, but he does a really good job of like framing his stories and getting to the core of stuff without just making you feel weighted down by everything. And I think that's great. If you read a book about music and you don't feel like you have to run to an encyclopedia or Google anything, then you've won.
Right. And there's a lot of time, you know, and those things have their place, you know, like you can read things, and usually this will happen in magazine articles, and you can read something by a technician or a guitar player and it gets so technical. And I don't know the difference between one guitar pedal and another, you know. Guitarists know that stuff, and it's good that there is a place that they can read about that stuff, but it's not something that really, you know, appeals to me. Now, you know, one that I'm thinking of that I found did a great job of presenting its time frame to the reader and putting the reader in the place is Questlove. A few years ago wrote a book called Music is History, and it's half bio and half music history, and it sort of talks about his life and the music that he was hearing at the time that had an influence on him. It is a fantastic read. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think that that's on my list actually.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, it's I have there's 2 notepads here. There's my list and the stuff that I have to add to my list. And I want to say too that we talked about this a little bit before we started. This is a great time to support and use your local library because they have a lot of the times you can get some of these books. We're not going too far off of left field. I didn't dive into university presses or anything nutty with mine. don't even check the university press stuff anymore because my brain will explode. And stay away from the English websites about books for music. Just stay away from them. They're bad. They're very bad.
Bad in the way that they are really great.
Yeah, bad, and that you will leave with like. I checked one today, and I'm like, "There's 7 books coming out," and I'm like,
Nope,
can't
do it.
Nope. I even put a Post-it note on my little desk. No,
nice.
No, it's just there's too much. There's just literally too much.
There is. I'll tell you my most recent library find. And for listeners who haven't heard this, I work at a library. I had a patron called up, and he was like, I'm looking for a book that I think you have. And we had it in our branch, and I didn't even know about this. He's like, I've got this book that I'm looking for. It's by, and he didn't say what kind of book it was. He just said, it's by Maceo Parker. That's Maceo. And I was like, let me stop you right there. I know who Mr. Maceo Parker is. And he says, you do? And I said, oh my gosh, yes. James Brown, Parliament, Prince. I absolutely know who Maceo Parker is. And he was like, well, there's this book that I'm looking for, and I think you have it. And I'm like, I don't know that we do. He's like, yeah, I checked your website. Your branch has it. I'm like, so I looked it up, and I'm like, holy cow. So I got this book for this dude. It's called 98% Funky Stuff. And so I got it for this guy. He took it. I ordered a copy from another branch for myself. It was so fun. And that was the thing that I had to read when I had to take a break from the Jann Wenner book. I was like, I got to read something short, and I got to read something fun. And this was maybe 200 pages. It was very short, but man, it told this guy's life and all of this touring and recording with James Brown and it was just a phenomenally fun book. I enjoyed it so much.
I had a library experience like that too. I had a guy call. He's like, hey, I'm looking for a book called A Pocket Full of Dreams. And I'm like, okay. So I look it up, and it's a biography of Bing Crosby, the first of 2 volumes about Bing Crosby that Gary Giddens wrote. And I'm like, oh, Gary Giddens writes about you. So guy came in, checked out the book. I go, after you read that, let me know how it is. And he came back in, about a week later, returned. He goes, this is phenomenal. Really? It's Bing Crosby. So I read it. And I literally read it in 3 days, because one of the things it does is it sort of talks about the early days of records, of like everything from like the 78s to like Paul Whiteman and the big bands and the evolution of big band music. And then it goes into like these stories of Bing Crosby and Louis Armstrong bar hopping in New York, where Louis Armstrong would take Bing Crosby to the black clubs, and Bing Crosby would get Louis Armstrong into the white clubs. And it's just like a who's who of like American musicians in the 20s and 30s. And there's all these great, I'm like, this is amazing. Right. And then the second one covers the war years of Bing Crosby, which, White Christmas is still a hugely profound record every year, but it's like, I had no idea of the social impact of White Christmas when it came out, in the same way that Brother Can You Spare a Dime was huge during the Depression. Right. Yeah. And, the way Crosby was involved in recording of music with ways of music's recorded, but also microphones. And he started Decca Records. So there's like all this stuff that I'm like, I never would have found this book if a patron hadn't told me about it. Right. And then the other one of those that happened was Last Train to Memphis by Peter Grolnick. It is Last Train to Memphis, the rise and fall of Elvis Presley. And I knew, like, it's Elvis. I'm like, okay, it's Elvis, right? Yeah. Stephanie will kill me. It's like, it's Elvis. But it's great. It's all about, Elvis and how he listened to music and the role of black music in making Elvis. And the second volume is Careless Love, the fall of Elvis Presley, So it's kind of cool, the unraveling of Elvis Presley. And it's all about like the latter part of Elvis's career. But they're both fantastic. And I never would have found those if a patron at the library hadn't recommended these. Mm-hmm. That's cool. I love when that kind of thing happens. Yeah, it's fantastic. I've had some great patrons over the years. Not many, just here and there, that you can have really good conversations with about music and about. There's these one couple that two or three branches ago, I've worked in 4 different branches, and they checked out so much music, and we would talk all the time, and they would get stuff from all across the spectrum. I mean, it was everything. And
Oh man, I love talking.
Same thing when you go to a record store too.
Yeah.
If you go to a good record store and you buy music, and the guy at the counter's like, "Oh, I just read a book on this." I'm like, "Whoa, wait a minute, what?" And then there you go.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I discovered our band could be your life. I was getting some replacements and some Husker Du, and the guy's like, "Hey, have you read this book?" And I'm like, "No." Michael Azarod's great. You should get this book. And I got it. And it was great. So I think, now it's podcasts too.
True.
But, the old school way was libraries and record stores. And if you go into a really good used bookstore or independent bookstore, just kind of browse, because every independent bookstore has a different music section, which is why I always go to them. It's the first place I gravitate towards besides the history section, is what's their music section like?
Yeah.
Because also they will have the music of their particular city. Like, it was everything I could do when I was in New Orleans, when I was going to a couple independent bookstores, not to buy every book on like ragtime jazz I could find, because they all looked interesting, right? But I'm like, no, I just can't.
Right. I gotta say, I miss this is back to like 85 through 90. I miss my record store days, where you just can get in conversations like that with your customers. And, I consider myself a fairly knowledgeable music aficionado, but when you get a good set of customers that all have different tastes and they all have different knowledge bases, and you can learn something from all of them, man, that's the best.
It is, actually, and, NPR has been great, because they'll talk about coming up, blah, 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 is having a book out. And you're like, wait a minute, what? And then you pull over and you listen, or you make a note of it and then go find it online. It's overwhelming now. It used to be really great to get a book on music, 15 years ago, because you got like one book every 6 months and you're like, oh, this is great. And then you could read, the classics or something. Right now, it's like every 2 weeks there's something. It's just like, stop it. You're killing me.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing. I think music literacy has greatly improved in ways that regular literacy hasn't. I just think people are paying much more attention to books on music right now, because that's something that, they don't have to be affiliated with a political party or be depressed by politics, or they don't have to like be quizzed on it the next day, and they can just kind of pursue a passion. It's one of the few reading things you can do, pursue a passion that's not going to get you, like, who's going to yell at you if you buy a book on Louis Armstrong?
True.
Or if you get a book on Prince, like, who's going to say, oh, I hate that guy? Like, who doesn't want to read a book on Prince or David Bowie? But that's the other beast too, is I think I've read more books on David Bowie since he died than I did when he was alive.
Dude, I don't even know the number of David Bowie books that I have. And for at least 2 years after his passing, every major magazine publisher put out series of magazines, not just a special magazine, but series of magazines. And I was so wrapped up in that mourning period, that the loss of Bowie, that I couldn't not buy all of that stuff that came out. There came a period, and it was about 2 years, when I was like, I cannot buy another single thing about David Bowie, because I have so much, and most of it I haven't even read yet. At least for the magazines, I have flipped through it all, but I haven't read in detail. I read a lot of it, but not all of it. And, some of those ones, there was a 4-part series that basically dealt with his entire career in 4 different chapters, basically. And oh my gosh, it was so good. I loved it.
I did a moratorium on those until the graphic novel came out, The Stardust Ray Guns and Moon Age Daydreams. That's the last Bowie thing I got. I didn't mess with Bowie's books or Bowie's art. I'm like, I'll get those at the library when I'm ready. The Gary Sheffield on Bowie book is a really great book, because it sort of just talks about his love of David Bowie and sort of where he was when he heard this stuff. And that's really good. And it's small compared to some of the other ones.
You mean Rob Sheffield?
Rob Sheffield. Yeah. What did I say?
Gary.
Oh, he's a baseball player.
I would not know that.
Which is the other dumb thing that I'm obsessed with. Yeah, the amount of books that are out on Bowie. And then, there's Bowie adjacent stuff, like the glam book that Simon Reynolds did. That's fantastic. I knew nothing about sort of the history of glam. I read about T-Rex and I read about Bowie, but I never would have associated Alice Cooper with glam. I just thought, oh, he's a metal guy,
Oh yeah.
Again, that's the thing where you learn something.
Right. Absolutely. That's the beauty of this stuff.
There's so many incredible books out. There's a guy named Terry Teachout. I've been reading his books lately. He has a biography that's out on Duke Ellington that's amazing, and a biography called Pops on Louis Armstrong. And they're both fantastic. I'm kind of picky with my jazz, but like just reading about Ellington and where he was in American popular music and how important he is. You mentioned Questlove earlier or Prince. There's a connection to Duke Ellington and a lot of that stuff. And it's amazing. So I love the exploration and the learning that I get through music books. It's like hearing a great record for the first time. So.
Yep. Well, speaking of Prince, here's another one of the books that I read this year that I wasn't as thrilled with as I was expecting to be. And that was This Is What It Sounds Like by Susan Rogers. Who I
was curious about that.
Yeah, who I knew mostly from her. She was an engineer who worked on many Prince albums, and that's where I know her name from mostly. So I was really looking forward to this. It's an exploration of what music is and how it relates to the human experience and how humans receive music and process it. And I thought, this is going to be amazing. And it kind of was. It was kind of amazing, but it's co-written by her and some other guy, but it was all from her voice. And she kept saying, while I like this style of music, my co-author likes this other stuff. And I was like, why are you telling me what this other person like? I just felt like it was so weird. Like the only sense that you got that there was a co-author was that she would say once per chapter, and my co-author likes this. And I'm like, well, what did your co-author do in the book? I was so confused by it. It was very strange.
Adjacent to that, I like the Nick Hornby Dickens and Prince book.
Oh, yes, I did too.
But I really wanted more. I mean, it was just enough, but I really, really wanted more.
Yeah, it was a very short book.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was, and that is two personalities that you would never think to pair up in any way.
No.
But it was an interesting read. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and his nonfiction stuff, like he's written a couple books on like music kind of stuff that are short essay things.
Yeah.
That have been pretty great.
Yeah.
And High Fidelity is the king of music fiction.
Oh, absolutely.
Which has haunted and plagued me for my entire life. There's so many great books. It's just literally when we decided we were going to do books tonight, I was like, okay, I'm going to write down some, or I will just turn into an ADHD babbling brook. Well, but man, there's just so many.
It's a good thing we only decided to do this about an hour before we recorded, because we both could have put together the most monumental list, and the show would end up being 4 hours long at least.
What's interesting too is more and more people are writing books now that are musicians. I think than used to. Like the Chris France book, Remain in Love, is fantastic. The Karen Valentine book is great. But those are two people I never would have expected to write autobiographies that would be like compelling and fascinating.
Right.
The Kathy Valentine book is just terrific.
Oh, I'll bet it is. I still haven't read that.
And so is the Chris France Remain in Light. I also liked Fingers. This is the other great book I read this year, Fingers Crossed by Mickey Bereni from Lush. And it's really good. And it talks a lot about the role of women in music, particularly in the 90s and 2000s. Britpop's happening, the shoegazer movement's kind of picking up. She's in the middle of it, and she's kind of like, the labels are kind of making her like, oh, she's this hot girl in a band kind of thing, and she's smarter than that, and her book is really, really fantastic. Also, the Tracy Thorn books from Everything But the Girl. She's written a couple different books, and I'm hit or miss on the Everything But the Girl catalog. Some of it I love, and some of it's kind of but her books about growing up in England and listening to music are pretty great.
Having already declared, both of us have, that we cannot buy any more music books, you did post one in our little podcast chat yesterday or earlier today, I don't remember, about an author that we should and hopefully can interview pretty soon. And that is She's a Badass, Women in Rock Shaping Feminism by Catherine Yeski Taylor. I'm really looking forward to reading that book. So
I'm going to read that whether we get her on the show or not. I'm like,
exactly.
Oh, this looks amazing.
Yeah, it really does.
It's something everyone who's a male needs to know about sort of like feminism in rock. We just need to know more of it to be better people. And there's so fewer books about female musicians than male musicians. So it's a perspective I want to get. I know if Stephanie were here, she would be, you know, telling us that too. The other thing too, and I wish Anthony was here to talk about this too, is I wish there were more books, really well done books on metal. As someone that wants to learn more about it, you know, I was really confident because there's a couple that came out over the last couple of years, but I really want more of that too, just to sort of know more. Because I like to read about stuff I don't necessarily listen to because it helps me understand it more.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the two areas of music that I really think there needs to be more music on, you know, or more music books on.
Right.
And I'm a sucker for books on record labels. I am like, you know, I just ordered the history of Sarah Records and a book on the history of Postcard Records today.
Mm-hmm.
And I told myself no more books, but I found them both used for under $15. So I'm like, they'll go on the pile. And then I felt really dirty. You know, it's like leaving your partner's house before they wake up. You know, like, I'm buying this book and I'm not going to read it yet for like 6 years. But, you know,
there's one that's on my pile, and I didn't put it on my list, so I'm not going to remember the name of it, but it was basically like the story behind 7 major labels of all different genres.
Talked about this.
And I haven't read it yet.
To get to this.
Oh my gosh, I'm so looking forward to reading that. That might be the next one on after I finish.
I've been waiting for you to review this because it's been on my it's been on my radar for a while.
Yeah.
But I can't get to it right now.
The two that I had kind of picked out to be my next reads there's one by Ken Calais, who is a producer, called Get Tusked. And it's a follow-up to his Making Rumors. And it was about the making of the Fleetwood Mac Rumors album. So
I literally just heard about this. Yes, go ahead.
Oh my gosh, it's so great.
Yeah, I wanted to read this.
There's so much detail in it that I would never have thought to even ask a question about. It's so interesting, and you learn so much about just little dumb things about how they created some of the music that went on Rumors. Like in Secondhand News, there's a little like a tick kind of sound that goes throughout it, and it's literally Lindsey Buckingham grabbed a pair of Mick Fleetwood's drumsticks and he's beating on a chair that has like a padded seat, and that's the sound. And so his second book is about the making of Tusk, which was the album after Rumors, and I'm so excited to read that. And the other one that I kind of had earmarked already was History of Rock and Roll Volume 2, which covers the years 1964 to 1977 by Ed Ward. I might have to set that aside because I don't know. There's so much else that I want to read, and I want to get to that book about the record labels.
I have just plowed through Let's Do It and Yeah, the 2 music books by Bob Stanley. Let's Do It's kind of a history of like music before 1950, popular music, and Yeah kind of is the history of like popular music from the 50s on.
Yeah.
And he's in St. Etienne. He puts out a ton of like anthology CDs of music that I've never heard of or know, and they're fantastic. Both of those books were great, but I am super excited to read his book on the Bee Gees that's coming out over here. He wrote the first really comprehensive biography of the Bee Gees. And I was just kind of like, oh, it's the Bee Gees. But, you know, hearing Anthony talk about the Bee Gees and then seeing the documentary on the Bee Gees, it's made me really want to dive into that. And it's getting incredible reviews. So I'm super excited to read that.
Yeah. I've got some like biographies that I've read, not recently, but over like the last few years that I've really enjoyed. One of them, and I found this to be a surprisingly compelling book. It's somebody that I love, so I was looking forward to reading it, but it ended up being a lot deeper than I ever expected. And that is The Beat of My Own Drum by Sheila E.
Oh, yeah.
Holy moly. That is a heavy book because, you know, it talks about in ways that I have never heard before. It talks about the rape experience that she went through when she was a kid and how that shaped everything in her life. And holy cow, is it just an incredible read. And then another one, just because it's super fun, and that is Red, My Uncensored Life in Rock by Sammy Hagar. That man has lived a life. That man has lived a party life. I mean, Montrose, and then his solo career, and then Van Halen, and then all the stuff he's done since then, and opening restaurants and starting a tequila line and all this stuff. I mean, it was a fun read. I really enjoyed it.
And I think when you read him, it helps you sort of understand him a little better too.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. There was one a bunch of years ago. I don't know. It was a long time back, by Stewart Copeland, one of my favorite drummers in the entire world, called Strange Things Happen. And it's mainly about his police career, but goes into his post-police thing where he was like made a huge career for himself scoring movies and some of his other musical projects that he got into. And I loved it. It was very good.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I'm a sucker for like anything that's a book on the musical history and legacy of New York.
Okay.
Like I know Tony Fletcher wrote a book on this. There's that Love Goes to Buildings on Fire by Will Hermes. There's a whole bunch of that stuff. And I love books on scenes. Like there's a book called Hit Factories. And it's all about these different scenes in England, like Sheffield and Leeds and Liverpool and Manchester. It just talks about why the cities have shaped their musical sort of scenes.
Yes, there's one, and I will never remember the name or the author, but there's one about the Athens, Georgia scene where, all these great bands like REM and B-52s and all these other bands that come up alongside them, but didn't have the same level of success that those two did. And I haven't read it before, but I'm looking forward to adding it to my ridiculous pile.
My cutoff for books for new books is, before I broke it today, is going to be September 1st, and then nothing new till Christmas or New Year's.
Right.
I have to plan it out. And then I am thinking of actually making a to-do book list. Like, this is my order of the books I'm going to read in 2024, which is going to get shot to hell by January 2nd. But it's that bad. And the thing is, the quality of writing is really good too. Before, musicians, there's a lot of biographies by musicians that you read and they're just not great. And you can tell because they're older. They're older books. But now, like anything in the last 20 or something years with the age of the internet, they either get a good ghostwriter or they've got the internet to help them,
Yeah, well, true.
Maybe it helps them with their memories or whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
And the access to music archives,
right,
I think has really helped make the quality of a lot of these books better.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I know that if I get off this podcast tonight and type in Google books on Norwegian death metal, I'll get a list.
Yeah, you might.
And I don't do that on purpose.
Right.
Because I'm curious about Norwegian death metal.
Sure.
I'm just not going to. No, I have to draw the line.
Yeah. And who knows? They might not be very good books, but there's got to be something out there.
And then there's the niche stuff, right?
Norwegian death metal isn't niche enough for you?
Oh, yeah, you're right. You're totally right. But like, I just finished Pat Lang's The History of NME.
Ooh.
Which is like, oh my God, it's amazing.
Oh, I'll bet that's great.
And then there's, I can't remember the title of it, but there's a book I just finished on, I'm going to blow the name of it, but it's basically Scottish writers on Scottish music. It's just like, okay, I got to stop. This is like, there's like literally all these little finite things that you can read about nothing. And they're fantastic.
Yeah.
We talked about John Robb earlier, but he's got a book on like, the history of music in Manchester, The North Will Rise Again. And it covers like 76 to 96 in Mancunian music. And it's fantastic. But then there's some really stuff that's tricky to read. Like I was really excited about Ray Davies' X-Ray. I really wanted to read that. And he doesn't write it in his third person. It's kind of, I don't know, it's weirdly written. It's interesting, but he tells it like you're reading a novel almost. So it's kind of not like, well, I did this or that. You spend so much time trying to make the circle around his writing style that it's a chore, but it's fantastic. I want to know about his songwriting process and what's up with his brother. And he doesn't really jump into it,
Yeah.
Which makes me very sad.
Well, I don't know. It's probably something that he doesn't want to delve too much
Well, I think
into.
everybody does that too. And that's okay. I am fine with an artist writing about their musical career and skipping some of the stuff if it's personally difficult for them, or if it's just something they don't want to comment on. I'm okay with that, which is part of the reason that Sheila E book is intriguing because she so candidly opens up about what happened to her.
Yeah.
Right. Karen, Kathy Valentine does some of that too, but people are opening up much more about their books. And then you get stuff, the other thing that's interesting is you get people that are doing books about stuff you don't think, like Gina Schock did a book of photography.
Yes. Yeah.
You get stuff like that, which is just fantastic. Or when now they're publishing, the big thing is they're publishing books of lyrics. There's one on Kate Bush that's out that I might get, but it's like basically a book of their lyrics. And then the artist writes little paragraphs about what they're thinking about the songs.
Mm-hmm.
And those are great and they're quick reads, but it's almost becoming too much. So.
Well, yeah, because, the big one of those is the McCartney one that came out a year or so ago. And it is monumental. It's so big. And, and he writes some stuff to go along with the songs, but not that much. It was mainly just lyrics. But it's Beatles and solo stuff and Wings stuff. And, it's a little bit of everything. But it's,
and he's Paul McCartney.
Exactly. And you kind of need a book because a lot of times Paul McCartney's lyrics don't make a damn bit of sense because he just throws words together.
Yeah. And I was kind of sad when I did that because the mystery kind of went away when I read some of them. I'm okay with that, but it just kind of made me sad.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to be disappointed.
I love firsthand account of artists and their songwriting process. And there's not many of those around that gets into real detail about the song, about how an album was made, how a song was written, that kind of thing. And I love that stuff. I don't necessarily need to read a book about your childhood and how that shaped you into the artist. No, I just want to hear about, because if I were to ever meet any of these people, these are the questions that I would ask. What studio did you record this album in? What was it like going into it? How did you come up with the idea for this song? What shaped the way that the lyrics of this other tune kind of, and I've got a Kiss one, a Heart one, and a Yes book that are exactly that, where it's just each of the people involved talking about how songs were made. And oh my God, I love that so much. And I learned some interesting stuff, in the 80s when Heart was in that period where their record label was basically forcing them to record a lot of outside material, from other writers and, farming all that stuff in, which is a period that they aren't all that happy with, even though it made a ton of money off of it. And Howard Leese, their guitar player, talked about one of the songs that they got from Mutt Lange, and he wanted to make a change. And they literally had to write to Mutt Lange and get permission to change in a chord structure. That's like a minor chord. He wanted to change to a major chord. So he had to get permission to raise an F to an F sharp. And I'm like, that's the most fascinating thing you could possibly tell me. That's the kind of stuff I like to read about. That really detailed, nerdy nonsense that I want to hear about.
I'm a sucker. I don't buy all of them, but I'm always intrigued by which ones are in the series. The 33 and the third series.
Oh, right? Those are great.
Those are fantastic if you want to know the nuances of a book. Like the one on Unknown Pleasure by Joy Division is great. The one on Pet Sounds is great. Andy Zaleski wrote one about Duran Duran that's really good. Mm-hmm. And there's some of those that are in that series that I have never thought about, listening to. But I will after I read the book.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And they're short, quick reads. The one on Murmur by REM is fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
And those are great. So if you're a fan of how this record got made and you want to sort of brief, I could read this on my train ride or my lunch break, but that 33 the third series is great.
I think the one on Low is one of the best Bowie books there is, because it gets so into his mindset and the process. And, that's a fascinating album to begin with. And so it just pulls back layer after layer after layer on that stuff.
And that's not an easy era of Bowie to dissect in 200 pages.
True.
It's not a record that people that love Bowie love it. But it's not the first record people go to and say, I want to hear a David Bowie record. It is, a triumph of Western civilization in the 20th century. But I don't know how you tackle that in under 400 pages, right? I was just blown away by how was he writing this in so brief of a time and getting right to it, It's fascinating.
Yep. Well, any last thing you want to throw in?
Oh man, the Rip It Up and Start Again book by Simon Reynolds on post-punk. If you're into post-punk, that's fantastic. Oh man, there's so many books. The two big thick ones that I did read in the last year is Paul Morley's book From Manchester with Love on the biography of Tony Wilson from Factory Records. That sort of succinctly pares everything down with that Manchester movement of that time, and also just the chaos that was Factory Records. Audrey Golden, one of my bosses at Louder Than War, has a book out on the women of 4AD Records right now, which kind of pivots off of that, which is really good. It's like I Thought I Heard You Speak. That's fantastic. And then this is a book we talked about, I think, right when this podcast was starting. Sweet Dreams and the story of the New Romantics by Dylan Jones. That's amazing. It's dense, though. It's like, okay, I now know everything I want to know about Visage and Adam Ant and, the Blitz Club. But it also made me understand Bowie more. There's books like that are out. And then probably the most odd left field book I read that I did not know I would love about music is Music by Max Steiner by Stephen Smith. It's like a biography of Max Steiner, who composed all the score from King Kong and all these great film score music. But like, if you're interested in film scores like I am, it's great. But also, as somebody who loves classical music, it was great to sort of like read about it, because it's so, like reading about classical music. It's so outside of my box, right? I like it and I listen to it, but it's just not something I go to read. And it's a really great, well-researched book on Max Steiner. And outside of getting all the Hollywood of that time kind of stuff, just the nuts and bolts of how the art of film scoring happened, because Steiner kind of made that happen. It's fantastic too. So that's my parting shots.
I've got one that kind of goes along with that, and that is The Music of James Bond by John Burlingham.
Yeah.
And it goes into the different composers that have worked for the Bond franchise and how each one of them approached Bond music differently, and how later ones incorporated electronic into it, and a lot of the pop theme songs. And it's a really great read. I got that for Christmas maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and I loved it.
The Earth Station One podcast has been bringing your inner geek out to play for the past 13 years. Over this time, we've seen things change in the world of geek and podcasting alike.
And your friends here at ESO are looking to change also. We are now giving you double the fun by coming to you twice a week, and not just in audio, but now you can see our lovely faces up on YouTube.
Join Mike and Mike as we celebrate our 700th episode and beyond. Earth Station One is proud to be a founding member of the ESO network.
All right. Well, I think that's about it, man. I think we've covered a lot of stuff.
We could go on for hours, but no one would listen.
Right. And, I think we've given a pretty good list of things to our listeners if they're interested in checking out. If you want to read books on different topics, on different genres of music, we've given you a lot of stuff. We've covered a lot of ground with this. So if you have a favorite music book that you have read, let us know about it and we'll add it to our list. And if you pick up any of these ones that we have read, then let us know what you thought about them. You can email us at modernmusicology1@gmail.com, or you can leave a comment on any of our socials or any place that you find this episode. We would love to hear from you. Okay, Mr. Robb, where can people find more about you on the internet?
So you can find me on this podcast and also the Weekend Justice podcast from needcoffee.com. You also can find me on Louder Than War Radio, which is online Mondays from 6 to 8 Greenwich Mean Time, 1 to 3 Eastern, 12 to 2 Central, with Antics. The shows are also archived. The first 24 shows are archived on Mixcloud on the Louder Than War Radio page, so you can go back and listen to them at your convenience. And it's 2 hours of just free-forming whatever's coming out of my head musically. Also, I host Juxtaposition on KDHX Wednesdays from 7 to 9, and all of those shows are archived at kdhx.org for 2 weeks, so you can listen to that. If you are out and about and running errands or whatever you're doing, you can always go to the archive stream and listen.
Cool. I have got a couple of other podcasts. I have got a Doctor Who one called Doctor Who A to Z, So if you're a Who fan, you should maybe check that out. That would be delightful. And I also am a big Star Trek fan. So I am on a show called Earth Station Trek. And that is part of the Earth Station 1 network, which Modern Musicology is a part of. So go check those things out. We will be back next week with a very special show about the 50th anniversary of the classic album Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. So I hope you tune in for that. We will be back. Everybody take care. Have a great week, and we will see you around the bend.
Ciao.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.